On a warm Sunday evening in July 2013, the stage at Hartford, Wisconsin, was alive with the magic of Fiddler on the Roof. And at its heart was 19-year-old Jessie Blodgett, an aspiring actress, singer, and musician. She belonged under those lights, and they, in turn, adored her. After a triumphant final bow, the cast and crew spilled into a joyous pool party, celebrating their successful show. Jessie, outgoing and popular, reveled in the camaraderie. But as the evening wore on, a creeping unease began to overshadow her joy. The disturbing behavior of two fellow actors, men much older than her, cast a pall over the celebratory atmosphere. Later that night, in the quiet sanctuary of her journal, Jessie poured out her heart. She wrote of feeling corrupted by some men in her life, frustrated that her friendly nature was being so cruelly misinterpreted. Yet, with the optimism that defined her, she concluded with a powerful declaration: "I am not helpless. I will recognize problems and confront them without fear. God be with me." Before she drifted to sleep, she confided in her mother, Joy. Two older men at the party, both in their 40s, had made unsettling passes. One, she explained, had been so aggressive he'd pulled her onto his lap against her will. She wondered aloud why it seemed impossible for men and women to simply be friends. Her innocent question would soon echo with a chilling, tragic irony. The next morning, Monday, July 15, 8 o'clock, Joy looked in on her only child, Jessie, still deeply asleep. Reassured, she quietly left for work. Her husband, Buck, had already departed, leaving Jessie to enjoy a rare, peaceful morning alone. When afternoon arrived, Joy returned home for lunch, a familiar, comforting routine. As she stepped inside, an unusual stillness hung in the air. Jessie hadn't stirred. Knowing her daughter had a piano student arriving any minute, Joy headed upstairs, a gentle nudge ready on her lips. She cracked open Jessie's bedroom door, softly calling her name but got no response. Thinking her daughter was simply exhausted from the previous night, Joy approached the bed, reaching out to give her shoulder a gentle shake. As her hand made contact, an icy coldness pierced through her. A shiver ran down her spine. Joy pulled back the covers, and the horror seized her. Jessie's delicate features were consumed by an unnatural, bluish hue. As her mind struggled to process the unthinkable, she saw it: Jessie's hair and nightclothes were soaking wet. Her own heart hammering against her ribs, Joy's trembling fingers dialed 911. Then, her husband, Buck. Her voice, ragged with terror, whispered the words no parent should ever have to utter. She feared Jessie was dead. As she waited, her eyes fixated on the horrifying truth emerging on her daughter's neck: clear, undeniable ligature marks. Though impossible to conceive, a chilling realization slowly dawned. A monster had been in their home that morning. Within minutes, their quiet home was swarming with emergency personnel. Buck joined his wife in their shared nightmare, watching as the surreal unfolded. Amidst the chaos, they learned the devastating truth: Jessie had more than likely been strangled. Deep abrasions on her wrists told an even more agonizing story: she had been bound. Investigators quickly pieced together the fragments of horror. An intruder had slipped into the Blodgett residence shortly after Joy left for work, entering through an unlocked door. He made his way to Jessie's room, overpowering her and tying her hands. Then, a brutal rape. When he was finished, he used a ligature to end her life. From the very beginning, a chilling assumption took hold: the killer knew the family. Detectives theorized that only someone intimately familiar with the Blodgett's habits would know they seldom locked their doors, believing their safe neighborhood made it unnecessary. It was also deeply unsettling that the intruder knew Jessie would be the only one home between 8 a.m. and noon, granting him ample, undisturbed time to execute his deadly plan. Their first step: Jessie's journal. They hoped for any mention of fear, any name that might spark recognition. The entry about the actor who had manhandled her the previous night immediately caught their eye. They found him and questioned him. Their interest skyrocketed when they discovered he'd called off work that Monday morning. He admitted to overstepping boundaries but insisted he meant no harm. And, crucially, he provided a solid alibi. He was cleared. The other partygoer Jessie found uncomfortable was also quickly eliminated. The initial, promising leads had dissolved. Investigators cast a wider net, searching for a killer cloaked in shadow. In what was initially thought to be a completely unrelated incident, a harrowing event had unfolded just 3 days before Jesse's murder. A young woman named Melissa Etzler was walking her dog in a serene nature park in nearby Richfield, when she was violently attacked by a knife-wielding stranger. Melissa recalled walking past a van in the visitors area when a man suddenly lunged, tackling her from behind. He raised a knife, attempting to stab her. But Melissa, fueled by pure instinct, grabbed the blade, refusing to let go. They struggled in a desperate fight for control. Finally, Melissa wrenched the weapon from his grasp. When the would-be assailant realized his victim was now armed, he nervously blurted out, "Can I just go?" Stunned by the audacious request, Melissa, knife still in hand, quickly called the police. She couldn't stop him from bolting to his van and speeding away, but she held on to the knife, a vital piece of evidence. When officers arrived, they were shocked by Melissa's hands, shredded by the blade as she clung on for dear life. Despite the trauma, Melissa, with incredible composure, provided a remarkably detailed description: a white male, sandy blonde hair, pale skin, 18 to 20 years old, around 210 pounds, wearing plaid shorts. She even knew the dark blue, older model Dodge Caravan he drove. 15 stitches later, Melissa was out of the hospital. Her attacker's description and vehicle information were shared across law enforcement agencies. A deputy who regularly patrolled the park stepped forward. He was certain he'd seen that van weeks earlier, in the exact same spot. Though the driver wasn't breaking any laws, something about him felt off. As a precaution, he'd run the plates. The owner's name was on record. Investigators checked the lead. Disappointment initially set in. The van's owner was middle-aged, far too old to be the attacker. But then they learned he had a teenage son. A spark of hope ignited. When detectives spoke to the registered owner, he was cooperative and eager to help. His 20-year-old son, Dan, often drove the van. Their interest soared. Dan was blonde-haired, and weighed 200 pounds, a perfect match for Melissa's description. Dan Bartelt wasn't home when detectives came. His father provided his cell phone number, eager to clear up any misunderstanding. In an odd, almost chilling coincidence that seemed insignificant at the time, when detectives reached their potential suspect, he was attending a vigil for Jessie Blodgett at her parents' house. As it turned out, Dan and Jessie had been high school classmates. They'd even dated briefly. Though the romance faded, their friendship remained strong, cemented by a mutual love for musical theater. They were, in the eyes of many, the best of friends. Those present at Jessie's memorial remembered seeing Dan take the call from police. After hanging up, he casually announced he had to meet with detectives about something or other. He gave Joy and Buck one last hug, dried his eyes, and walked out with their blessing. On their end, detectives were struck by Dan's surprising lack of curiosity. He hadn't asked why they wanted to speak with him, an unusual eagerness to comply. It wasn't a crime, but it raised a red flag. As soon as Dan sat down with investigators, they cut straight to the chase. Where was he the morning Melissa was attacked? His alibi was instantaneous. He'd spent the entire day with his good friend, Jessie Blodgett, who was now, tragically, deceased. Seizing the unexpected opportunity, detectives shifted gears, asking what he knew about the events at the Blodgett's home. Without missing a beat, Dan calmly replied, Jessie had been raped and murdered in her bedroom. Detectives noted multiple fresh cuts and abrasions on Dan's hands and arms. When asked, he shrugged them off as a minor work accident. What he didn't know was that his father had already told them he was unemployed. Caught in a blatant lie, they pressed him. He suddenly recalled a cooking mishap. Skeptical, investigators pressed harder. There was no shame in being a clumsy chef. No reason to lie. Taking a deep breath, Dan confessed to the attack on Melissa. He frequented the park, he said, to write his novel. He'd been toiling on it for years, a magnum opus. Often, when his parents thought he was at school or work, he was really in his van, people watching, writing. When asked why he attacked an innocent girl and her dog, his reply chilled the room to its core: he had merely wanted to scare someone. A jobless college dropout with no future, he claimed he was so frightened by the world that he wanted to release his growing fear onto someone else. With his admissions, Dan was arrested for aggravated assault. Though they now knew his connection to Jessie, there was no initial link to her murder. Not yet. The turning point came with Dan's unwitting revelation. When interrogated about Melissa, a case unrelated to Jesse's at the time, he readily offered up a crucial detail: Jesse had been raped. Only the perpetrator would have known about the sexual assault. This slip of the tongue placed Dan Bartelt at the very top of the suspect list, once autopsy results confirmed the sexual assault. When directly questioned about Jesse's murder, Dan, unsurprisingly, denied any involvement. But a warrant to search his personal belongings opened a horrifying window into the darkest corners of his mind. His computer revealed a chilling obsession: routine searches for serial killers and their methods. More disturbing still, he had searched for snuff films, underground videos allegedly depicting women being raped and murdered live on camera. His devices were a repository of pornographic images, many depicting violence against women. One video, in particular, was a horrifying blueprint. It showed a woman being raped and strangled, her body then meticulously washed and placed back in bed, covered with a blanket as if she were merely sleeping. The sickening acts portrayed on screen mirrored, with terrifying precision, what had happened to Jessie in the supposed safety of her own bedroom. Even confronted with this damning evidence, Dan refused to budge. He did, however, amend his story. Instead of close friends, he now claimed he and Jessie had rekindled a romantic relationship in the weeks leading up to her death. He hadn't mentioned it before, he said, out of respect for his girlfriend, who didn't know he was seeing someone else. He insisted that on the morning of the murder, he had told his parents he was going to work but had actually spent the day either riding at Woodlawn Union Park or driving aimlessly. CCTV footage from the park confirmed his presence there on July 15. For once, he seemed to be telling the truth. On a hunch, investigators visited the park. They searched the trash bins. And there, inside a cereal box, they found it, a ball gag, a device often used in BDSM to stifle screams, ligatures, and several blood-soaked disinfectant wipes. Lengths of rope were also discovered, later chillingly matched to the marks on Jessie's neck. The case against Dan Bartelt was heating up by the minute. A search warrant was executed on his family's home. In the garage, more of the same style of rope. On the air ducts, tape that matched discarded samples Joy found under Jessie's bed, and strips retrieved from Melissa Etzler's botched abduction scene. Forensic examination revealed one undeniable truth: the tape was covered with Dan's fingerprints. The collected evidence painted a terrifying picture of Jessie's last moments. Detectives were convinced. Dan entered the house shortly after Joy left. He crept into Jessie's room, hog-tied her, and placed the ball gag in her mouth, securing it with tape. He then raped her before using the rope he had brought for that very purpose to strangle her to death. When he was certain she was dead, he washed her hair and body in a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. He placed her back in bed, covered her with a blanket, and chilled in imitation of sleep. Then, he went to the park to dispose of his implements. Little did he know, the very alibi he concocted would lead to his undoing when his discarded tools were found days later. The final, irrefutable proof: Dan's DNA matched samples from Jessie's rape kit and the DNA scraped from under her fingernails. Both his and Jessie's DNA were confirmed to be present on the ligatures. On July 31, 2013, Dan Bartelt was officially charged with the first-degree intentional homicide of Jessie Blodgett. He was also held for trial for attempted first-degree murder, first-degree reckless endangerment, and false imprisonment in relation to the attack on Melissa Etzler. On October 14, 2014, a jury deliberated for just 3 hours before finding Bartelt guilty of Jessie's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A victory for Jessie's family and for the prosecutor, who described Bartelt as the most dangerous criminal he had ever met. When given the chance to speak at his sentencing, Bartelt defiantly pleaded his innocence, telling Jessie's family, who had treated him like a son, that the prison uniform and restraints don't make me guilty. He offered no apologies, even as Jessie's father, Buck, offered forgiveness in open court for his unspeakable acts. For the attack on Melissa Etzler, Bartelt received a paltry 5 years in prison, with an additional 5 years of supervision. Thankfully, as he will never walk free again, these terms were largely symbolic. In September 2017, Bartelt appealed his verdict, claiming he had provided information without a lawyer present. But after a careful review, the Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld his guilty verdict. As of August 2023, he remains at Waupun Correctional Facility, where he will spend the rest of his natural life. The horrifying details of Jesse's last moments may forever be shrouded in mystery. The only living witness remains in a perpetual state of denial, unlikely to ever expose the full depths of his depravity. But what is undeniable is the unimaginable terror Jessie must have felt, realizing she was about to die at the hands of someone she trusted, someone she considered a friend. Tragically, despite countless hours together, she had never truly known him at all. Though her life ended in tragedy, Jessie Blodgett made every minute count. A gifted singer, performer, and talented piano and violin instructor, she poured her innate goodness and patience into her students. A University of Wisconsin sophomore, she passionately championed animal rights and environmental protection and stood as an anti-bullying advocate and a warrior against domestic violence. Jessie didn't live to see the social changes she envisioned, but her loved ones are determined that she did not die in vain. In 2016, her father, Buck, established the Love-Hate Project in her honor. Its mission: to end male-on-female violence, inspiring love over hate through education and programs that teach those with aggressive tendencies healthier ways to channel their energy. How high Jessie would have flown, had she been given the chance, we will never know. That her life was stolen by an individual who wore the mask of a friend yet was her worst enemy remains one of the most unsettling truths of this tragic case. Her spirit, however, lives on, a beacon for change, reminding us that even in the face of unspeakable darkness, love and truth will always strive to overcome hate.